Chapter 3, Section 1 of Cup of Gold. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Read by Kurt from Tucson, Arizona. Cup of Gold by John Steinbeck. There were many glittering reputations along the coast of Darien and among the green Caribbean islands when Henry Morgan came to be a buccaneer. In the wine shops of Tortuga were tales of 1,000 fortunes made and spent, of fine ships taken and sunk, of gold and plate dumped on the docks like wood. The Free Brotherhood had grown to be a terrible thing since Pierre le Grand, and a little band of hunters slipped out of the woods of Hispaniola and captured the vice-admiral of the Plate Fleet from a canoe. France and Britain and Holland had seen in these islands a good hermitage for their criminals, and for years they had unloaded worthless human freight on the Indies. There was a time in those old nations when anyone who could not give a good virtuous account of himself was crammed into a ship and sent off to be a bondservant to any man who would pay a small sum for him. And when their time was up, these people stole guns and warred on Spain. It was not strange, for Spain was Catholic and rich, while Huguenots and Lutherans and Church of England men were poor and out at heel. They fought a holy war. Spain had locked up the treasures of the world. If poor ruined beggars could be reaching a coin through the keyhole, who was the worse for it? Who minded except Spain? Surely England and France and Holland took little heed of it. Sometimes they provided the pirates with commissions against Aragon and Castile, so that you might come on a man who 10 years before had been sent out in a prison ship carrying the style of Captain by the grace of the King. France had the good of her wayward children at heart, for she sent out 1,200 women to Tortuga to be the wives of buccaneers. The whole 1,200 turned to a business more profitable than wifehood immediately they landed, but France could not help that. They had got their name, these buccaneers, of a time when they were nothing more than cattle hunters. There was a way of smoking meat by burning small bits of fat and flesh in the fire. This made the meat more savory than usual. It was called the boucan process, and from it the pirates were named. But after a time these hunters came out of the woods in little, careful groups. Then bands formed, and then whole fleets of 8 or 10 vessels, and finally thousands assembled in Tortuga, and from that spot of safety buzzed about the flanks of Spain. And Spain could not combat them. Did she hang 10? 100 joined their ranks? So she fortified her towns and sent her treasures on the sea under the protection of warships filled with soldiers. The numberless vessels of the Spanish colonies were nearly all driven from the sea by fierce buccaneers. Only once in a year did the Plate Fleet sail out for home. There were fine names among the Brotherhood, and exploits to make Henry Morgan squirm with jealousy if he had not been so confident of overshadowing them all one day. Bartholomew Portuguese there was, who took a great prize, but before he could get away with it he was captured near Campeche. The gibbet was erected on the shore for his hanging. He watched them put it up from his prison aboard ship, and in the night before his execution he stabbed his guard and swam away, supported by a keg. Before 8 days had passed, he came again with pirates in a long canoe, and stole the same ship away from the harbor of Campeche. He lost her, of course, in a storm off Cuba, but the story was nevertheless told with glee in the taverns. Roche Brasiliano was a Hollander with a chubby face. When he was young, he was driven from Brazil by the Portuguese, and from their colony he had taken his name. Curiously, he held no rancor against Portugal. his hatred turned on Spain. He was a kindly, gentle, beloved captain, so only there were no Spaniards about. His men worshipped him and drank no other toast but to his name. Once, when his ship was wrecked in Castilla de Oro, he killed most of a troop of Spanish horse and used their beasts to ride off on. When the men of Spain were near him, Roche was a foaming beast. It was told that once he roasted prisoners on green spits over a slow fire. As the rich shipping was driven from the sea, the buccaneers must be taking villages, and then even towns with forts. Lewis Scott pillaged Campeche and left it a black, smoking pile. L'Ollonais had come from the sables d'Olonne, and very rapidly he became the most feared man in the Western Ocean. He began with a real hatred for Spain and ended with a strong love of cruelty. He had pulled out tongues and carved his prisoners to pieces with his sword. The Spanish men would far rather have met the devil in any form than L'Ollonais. The whisper of his name emptied the villages in his path of every living unit. It was said that the mice fled to the jungle when he came. Maracaibo he took, and New Gibraltar and St. James de Leon. Everywhere he slaughtered men for the fierce love of it. Once, when the bloodlust was in him, he had commanded that 87 prisoners be bound and laid in a row on the ground. Then he walked down the line carrying a whetstone in one hand and a long sword in the other. That day he cut off 87 heads with his own hand. But L'Ollonais was not content with murdering the Spanish men. He went into the gentle country of Yucatan, where the people lived in ruined stone cities, and where the virgins went crowned with flowers. They were a quiet people in Yucatan, and their race was dying in an inexplicable decay. When L'Ollonais went away, the cities were heaps of stones and ashes, and there were no crowns any more. The Indians of Darien were different, fierce and fearless and unrelenting. The Spaniards called them bravos and swore that they were untamable. They had been friends of the pirates because they so hated Spain, but L'Ollonais robbed them and murdered the tribesmen. These Indians waited many years for their vengeance, and at last they caught L'Ollonais when his ship had wrecked on the shores of their country. They built a fire and danced for hours, and then they burned the Frenchman's body bit by bit before his eyes, a finger and a pinch of flesh at a time. A lean French gentleman came into a tavern at Tortuga one night, and when they asked his name, seized a large rum keg and hurled it from him. "Bras de fer," he said, and no one ever questioned him farther. It was never known whether his name was hidden for a shame or a sorrow or a hatred, but all the coast came to know of him as a great brave captain. These were men who made phrases to be repeated. "No pray, no pay," the exterminator had bawled, and now everyone was saying it. When Captain Lawrence, in a small boat, was assailed by 2 Spanish frigates, he said to his men, "You have too much experience not to be sensible of your danger, and too much courage to fear it." This was a fine saying, and on the strength of it his followers captured the 2 Spanish ships and took them home to Goave. Not all were cruel or even violent men. Some had a curious streak of piety. There was Captain Watling, who made it a point to hold divine service every Sabbath, with the whole crew standing uncovered. Daniel once shot a sailor for an irreverence. These buccaneers prayed loudly before battle, and if they were successful, half of them trooped off to a captured cathedral to sing Te Deum, while the other half plundered the prize. Captains of ships maintained the strictest discipline among their men, swiftly punishing insubordination or any other wrongdoing which might interfere with their success. There were no such riots at sea as were later tolerated by Kidd and Blackbeard and Lafitte. but out of the whole history of the Brotherhood, one man towered. There was a Dutchman named Edward Mansvelt. In bravery and in soldiery he was preeminent, for he had taken Granada and St. Augustine in Florida and St. Catherine's Isle. With a great fleet of ships he had gone cruising along the coasts of Darien and Castilla de Oro, taking what he might lay his hands on. But there was a power of dream in him. Out of his mob of ragamuffin heroes he wanted to make a strong, durable nation, a new, aggressive nation in America. As more and more of the buccaneers flocked to his command, his dream solidified. He consulted the governments of England and France. They were shocked and forbade him to consider such a thing. A race of pirates not amenable to the gibbets of the crowns? Why, they would be plundering everybody. He must not be thinking about it at all. But still, he went on planning and planning his new government. It would be started at St. Catherine's Isle. He settled a body of his men there, and then went casting about for more to join his new nation. His ship was wrecked near the city of Havana, and Spaniards strangled Edward Mansvelt on the garrote. These were the men Henry Morgan had set about to lead, and confidently he saw no barrier, saw only a man planned carefully and considered his chances. These stories and these men were well enough, but they fell short in the large actions. They were improvident and vain. They might help him one day. Mansvelt was living, and Bras de Fer was an old man when Henry Morgan went sailing with Black Grippo in the Ganymede. 1. There was excitement and curiosity in Port Royal when Morgan was fitting out the Ganymede for sea. Strange stores and unusual weapons were going into her hold. Drawn on by the quiet confidence of this young man, many sailors volunteered for his crew. The captain found 5 gunners of reputation in the port and signed them to go with him. When the Ganymede dropped her sails and slipped from the harbor, a crowd of idlers stood on the beach and watched her go. They cruised to the coast of Darien looking for prey, but the sea appeared to be swept clean of Spanish craft. One morning, near the port of Cartagena, they sighted the tall red hull of a trading ship. Captain Morgan hid his men. No soul was allowed to show himself. Even the steersman worked in a tiny house, while a dummy wheel swung idly on the deck. Then down on the Spanish boat they bore, and the Spanish crew was overwhelmed. Here came a boat and no man working her. It smacked of witchcraft, or of one of those nameless tragedies of the sea the sailors talked about. Perhaps a plague had killed all the crew, and they could take and sell this ship. But when they were close, 3 masked guns spouted flame. They fired only at one spot, and when they had done, the rudder of the Spanish ship hung in splinters, and she floundered about in no control. Then Captain Morgan, hanging aft, out of range of her broadside, poured shot into her hull until the flag fluttered down. It was the first prize of his planning. A few days later he brought up with another ship and ran alongside to board. The Spanish crew was massed against the bulwarks to repel the attack, and immediately the air was filled with clay powder pots, which landed in the thick group and exploded. The Spanish men ran screaming to the shelter of the hold to escape this flashing death. When Henry Morgan came at last to Tortuga, 4 prizes followed in his wake, and he had not lost a man. It was as easy as he had known it would be. Here were 4 monuments to his planning. One had only to do the unexpected thing quickly. This was the secret of successful war. Mansvelt was in Tortuga when Henry Morgan came, and his little eyes glittered as he looked at this plunder. Soon he sent for this new leader. "You are Captain Morgan, who took the 4 prizes in the harbor?" "Yes, sir, I am." "And how did you do this thing? The Spanish ships are strongly armed and wary." "I did it, sir, with my planning." Many nights have I considered how to do these things. I work with surprise, sir, when other men use only force." Mansvelt regarded him with admiration. "I am fitting out an expedition to take St. Catherine's Isle," he said. "Then I am going to form a republic of buccaneers who will fight with a patriotism. Would you like to be vice-admiral of this expedition? I have some reputation for picking men." The name of Mansvelt was mighty on the seas, and Henry flushed with pleasure. "I would like it, sir," he said quickly. The fleet sailed out, and Captain Morgan was vice-admiral. There was a fine assault. The ships threw in their ragged hordes, and slaughter walked on the walls. The island could not withstand the fierceness of the attack, and finally the fortress fell. Then the Dutch admiral drew up his government and left Henry Morgan in command while he went out to scour the world for recruits. He and his ship were lost and never heard from again. It was said the Spaniards strangled him in Cuba. Captain Morgan was now the paramount leader of the Spanish Main. Ships flew from the ways to join his fleets, to sail under his command and fight with him and share in his success. He went up against Puerto Bello and sacked the town. The houses were burned and all the helpless citizens were plundered. When Captain Morgan's ship sailed off, the jungle was already creeping into the ruins. For 10 years he sailed about the ocean, among the islands and along the green coasts of tropic America, and his was the greatest name of all who had gone out for plunder. The pirates of the world came flocking to his reputation. People cheered him in Tortuga and Goave. Numberless men volunteered for every expedition. Now all the brotherhood waited for Captain Morgan to open a keg of liquor in the streets or to run wild through the town. He never did. Coldly he walked about, clad in a purple coat, and gray silk stockings and gray shoes with bows. At his side hung a long rapier, no thicker than a pencil, in a scabbard of gray silk. At first the sailors strove to establish a comradeship with him, but he pricked them away with frigid insults. The lessons of the slaves lived on in him. He did not try to buy his popularity, and all the free brotherhood showered it upon him, cast their lives and their fortunes on the knees of his success. End of Chapter 3, Section 1.